Welcome to Post Break. My name is Chris Peterson. I'm an EP at Nice Shoes and board secretary of the PNYA. Today's topic is the VFX life cycle for today's budgets and teams. And we named it that with the budgets and teams because I think a lot of us have seen budgets can be seen to be going down. That could mean teams can shrink. Maybe there's not a VFX editor, or maybe more and more duties are being put on the AE's head when that person is already overloaded with responsibilities. And the chain reaction of that is that can filter through to the VFX vendor, on through to the DI vendor, on through to delivery. So these decisions, these circumstances kind of reverberate through projects. So today's topic will be a discussion on best practices within those environments. Which brings us to the introduction of today's moderator. She's a post-production and VFX supervisor, also producer and artist. She's an assistant professor at Syracuse University as well, and just co-authored a book titled Visual Effects for Indie Filmmakers, a guide to VFX integration and artist collaboration. Her credits include Chicago, Elf, The Notebook, and tons more. And she is, of course, a PNYA member. Please give a warm welcome to Shana Holmes.
Hi. Thank you for the intro, and thank you everyone for joining us today. As Chris mentioned, I am a visual effects supervisor, producer, and artist for feature film and episodic TV. I started as a visual effects artist in Los Angeles, and after doing that for about 10 years, I felt I needed more client interaction, so I moved to New York City and took on a role of a post producer. So when I was there, I was working at a post house, and I got a broad overview of post-production from dailies to conform to color and final deliverables. And it made me realize how isolated I was in visual effects as an artist from the entire rest of the process. And now I kind of had this better understanding where VFX fit into the pipeline by being in direct contact with production and editorial and the post house. So from there, I transitioned to being a VFX supervisor. So I was both on set and supervising in-house. And I was also a producer. So I kind of wore all the hats at once. Lead artist, everything. So I was doing that for the big deluxe encore method, company 3, you name it. Everything that they own, did own for New York City for many years. And as Chris mentioned, now I'm teaching. So I'm up in Syracuse, New York, teaching at Syracuse University. And I also built a post-production company called Flying Turtle Post with my students. So it's kind of like an apprenticeship program that we have. So again, as Chris mentioned, today's topic for the panel came about because of the book that I just wrote. So visual effects for indie filmmakers is basically trying to demystify the visual effects process. So how do you integrate it into your projects and work with VFX teams? I think a lot of people, when they hear visual effects, all they see is dollar signs, and they get scared and run away, and they ignore it as much as possible. Some even don't deal with it until they're picture locked, and then they have an impending deadline, and then they're like, I guess I have to deal with it now. And then this is kind of, unfortunately, where a lot of us come into the process, and it's kind of the guaranteed way to exceed your post-production budget and get really rushed for your deadline. So a better plan is to involve visual effects teams from the beginning, include us in discussions throughout with a variety of different departments to see what resources are available throughout the entire production and post-production stages in order to achieve your intended vision. And you have to provide the VFX team with the best options so that they can be successful within your budget and schedule constraints. So today's panel discussion is very similar to what my book presents. So we would look at the different stages and how to include visual effects in all stages of production, providing tips and tricks, as well as advice on how to work with the post house and VFX teams. The book also includes testimonials and real world examples from both client and vendor perspectives. So from screenwriters, UPMs, stunt coordinators, all the way to editors, colorists, finishing artists, and VFX supervisors, which is basically who we have on today's panel. Today, the industry is evolving to have more open dialogue between client and vendor sides to accomplish the work within the budgetary and schedule constraints. But they're still striving to have theatrical quality, no matter what the project final deliverable is. So this makes it increasingly more and more difficult to achieve, and requires much more communication and collaboration on projects of all sizes. So we hope this discussion today helps you uncover ways to create this communication pipeline early in the process, so you can understand and utilize the talent and resources available to your project more efficiently and effectively to your advantage. So with that being said, I'd like the panelists to introduce themselves and give some highlights of your career. How'd you get here? What do you do? So Alex, if you want to start, and then we'll go to Molly and Juan.
So humble beginnings. I went to film school when I was younger. I wanted to be a DP because I was really into photography and making films, but that obviously didn't work out. So I found out that I was really interested in working closely with images and understanding kind of the mechanics of processing and quality preservation and just the overall practice of making things look nice. So I started working in post-production officially in 2018 as a runner at a Goldcrest Post in the meatpacking district. And I spent a few years there working with a pretty close-knit team, doing long-form finishing. And I was doing data IO, making deliverables, color assisting, conform, helping out engineers, and with a few promotions in between, started to level up. Then in mid-2021, I started at Nice Shoes, where I'm currently at, as a finishing artist for their long-form team. And since then, worked on a lot of different kinds of projects, docuseries for streamers, scripted features, indies, and studio features, short films, pretty much everything you can find in our little space. And I primarily do conform, so just conform finishing, working with colorists, but I also do a good deal of compositing and some title design, other odds and ends, because at the end of the line, you never really know what to expect, and obviously the film has to be finished, so that's what we do. But as far as software stuff, I work in DaVinci Resolve. But since the role of finishing kind of intersects with so many departments, I editorial, VFX, title design. So I have to kind of branch out, and I spend a lot of time in kind of everything. Avid, Premiere, After Effects, Nuke, any other plugin softwares that you might use, so we can make sure that your final elements are, as intended and look as best as they possibly can. And that's kind of why I really like working in finishing, because it's extremely gratifying to see the culmination of work created by artists and filmmakers who have put months or years into making their film or TV show or whatever. And every project brings a new set of challenges, so it's really exciting to learn new things along the way. That's it for me.
Hello. Hi, I'm Molly DiBartolo. So I started my career in post-production, working at Building Deluxe New York when we opened that facility back in 2008. And I worked there, film workflows, film to digital, DIs, kind of got my hands involved in a little bit of everything, wanted to kind of know how things worked under the hood. Went and started working with Harbor when they expanded their facility, and Joe Goller went over there. And then transitioned into working in production in upstate New York with a production company, American High, and started off originally just setting up their post facilities so we could do dailies and like online our own films at the beginning, and really kind of do pretty basic just post prep work and things like that, and then eventually transition into production. So now I'm a producer and production manager, working on their films. And we've done over 15 films in Syracuse, and our film Miguel Wants to Fight is available on Hulu, which was done by these lovely folks who are on the panel with us as well, which is pretty exciting. And yeah, so I try to bring my post-production knowledge into the production world as well, making sure that people are thinking about these things in advance, both from a creative perspective, from a budget perspective, and like from a workflow perspective as well too.
Great, thank you. And Juan?
Hi, my name is Juan Cespedes. I'm a freelance editor and assistant editor. I started my career in reality TV as a development producer. So what that does and what that entailed was creating and cutting sizzle reels for the company. I did that for about 3 years, and during that process, I discovered a passion for editing, and the workflow and everything that had to do with it. So in that same company, I moved to assistant editing on my first show called Dance Moms. And from there, I moved to scripted content, so feature films and TV shows. I worked on some of my credits include Startup, Between Two Ferns, the movie, The Binge, which was done with American High and Molly, Miguel Wants to Fight, like what we just said, which I did with Molly and Alex as well, and American Horror Story. I've had some incredible mentors and post crew that I've worked with throughout the years, that, you know, have taught me practically everything I know. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Great, thank you. Gonna kick things off. So kind of defining a little bit about something that's in all projects these days, invisible visual effects. It's hard to say. So visual effects are in every project, no matter what the budget. And I think it would be surprising to most people to know how many VFX shots are actually invisible to the viewer. Basically, if the visual effects team does their job right, their work should be seamless and undetectable. So often you think you're working on a non-VFX show, but then you end up with multiple scenes that turn it into something that you're spending thousands of dollars on to accomplish. So how do you kind of foresee that and prevent that? What are some of the common things to look out for when you have a production? Some things that I wanted to point out, in case you're not familiar with invisible or supporting visual effects, some of the big ones include beauty fixes, so like wrinkles throughout the entire movie. You have to remove someone's wrinkles to make them look 10 years younger. Isolating certain colors in scenes, screen composites. So we all are on our phones today. How do you put that in a movie? Can't have 100 green screens in your movie and not expect to have visual effects. So sky replacements when you're shooting over multiple different times of the day, but you need it all to look like it's the same scene. Continuity fixes, crew and equipment removals, Even editorial will create some visual effects for you when they need to cut out some dialogue that someone's saying or do performance modifications. The good thing is today, you don't have to go to visual effects for all of these different types of shots to accomplish. So I was hoping each of our panelists could talk about how your role intersects with visual effects. Like, what do you see as common visual effects these days? How do you deal with that on a day-to-day? So Molly, let's start with you since you are in more the production side these days. So how do you deal with visual effects on the daily?
On the daily, sure. I mean, at the beginning of things, my big thing is kind of making sure that we're thinking about it in pre-production, making sure, you know, that we're paying attention to these invisible effects that we know we're going to need to do, but people aren't necessarily thinking of them in the forefront because they're not, you know, something that's a creative effect. So a big thing that I'm doing is making sure that all the departments are talking, that we're having these conversations. Something that I brought up that I think is probably one of the most common things I see, especially we do a lot of high school comedy movies, and as Sheena mentioned, is cell phone screens and computer screens. That's a conversation that every time has to be brought up. How are we dealing with this? What's being done practically? Who's creating the assets? All of this stuff, so that you know, when it comes to the back end and we are at the end of the show, we're prepared for this and we're not incurring unexpected costs or being inefficient, things like that. So that's pretty much kind of the majority of what I'm seeing visual effects wise, in terms of the conversations that need to be brought up every single time. Now, each of our films sometimes have, you know, specialty elements that we need to deal with as well too. So I'll be also making sure that we're consulting with the VFX team, depending on, you know, the complexity of the film. We may not have landed on who we're going to be working with yet, or there may be, you know, still the bids are still being worked out or figured out. So making sure that I consult with someone from a VFX house, and generally that's Shayna because she's awesome and has worked with us a bunch. But consult with them to make sure that we're thinking through things and the right questions are being asked, and we are, you know, making the decisions on production during production that will set us up for success in the future.
And you mentioned screens. What is one solution that you have so you don't turn your really small budget into this huge VFX need?
Plan it out and do them practically, especially text. So obviously certain things, you know, you might not have the budget to build a full, you know, website or something like that that's specialty. But, you know, making sure that doing what you can practically, and then only altering elements that you need to alter. So whether or not that's, you know, doing a text message sequence and maybe you need to change the time because you're not able to do that aspect of it, or, you know, it can't say Verizon or something like that. But trying to do those type of things practically when it's not something that requires a graphical element and already kind of has that graphic interface built into it. Same thing with like even Instagram and Facebook and things like that. The more that you can have your, you know, your character doing these things and interacting with these things, even if you do end up deciding to replace them later, it just is creating that that practical environment that that brings the post team in, especially if they're not able to be a part of production or be on set when these things are happening and the decisions are made.
Yeah, I think a lot of people's go-to is I have a screen, I have to put green on it. And just remember, you are locking yourself into visual effects if you do that. But if you have something practical on the screen, you can get away with a bunch of the shots not being visual effects, or you could have some other alternative way for graphics to pop up, which would be a cost saver. So Juan, where do you see it as an assistant editor? What is your kind of like day-to-day visual effects tasks that you do?
Yeah, for sure. So everything that Molly said is amazing. So practical is amazing, you know, whenever that happens, and whenever you have a production that is like thinking ahead of things before just, you know, shooting a green screen because, you know, we have a phone that is here and we need to show this. But you know, editorial knows exactly how many visual effects we're going to be dealing with right from the start of filming. And that's something that Molly and her crew work on to be able to communicate to us and just to tell us, based off the script, this is how things are going to look like, and this is how we're going to shoot it. And they're all in constant communication, as they shoot every single day, and we're talking with them about things even if it's a shot that they think, okay, this is what we have, and we see it in the dailies, and the editor and I feel like we need something else, a different type of element to be able to make the scene work. To be able to have that that vision that the producers and the directors have, and be able to carry that through all the way until the end for our vendors. So, visual effects that we see commonly are green screens, screen comps, computers, phones. Sometimes we get really cool visual fantasy sequences, that are a little more complex. And then also, again, not to mention when you were talking about those invisible visual effects, while we go through our edit, we also have to alter, specific shots to be able to grab a specific performance from an actor, or something that we really like or the director really likes, and we have to do a split screen or something like that. Maybe do some fluid morphs, which is stitching shots together and try to make it seamlessly. And I know Alex loves these, but some speed changes, that type of stuff, that also come up that are not in the beginning of those of that list of things that we're keeping in mind while they're shooting. And the edit room, so we organize, we label visual effects, so every shot has to have a name, and yeah, that name translates all the way until the end. So we are able to communicate with our vendors on which specific shot we're talking about. And as an assistant editor also, I'm using my editing softwares, either be Avid Media Composer, Premiere Pro for heavier loads, After Effects, to create temp VFX. So sometimes, it's amazing when you have the budget to be able to have a visual effect editor in the mix. And so as an assistant editor, you kind of pass on that responsibility to the visual effects editor. But if the production can't, afford another position, that task mainly falls on the assistant editor. And so I guess, the main thing, it doesn't have to be perfect in a way. The main thing is just kind of, when you're creating temp visual effects, is just to try to make the best that you can out of what you have, out of the tools that you have, because an assistant editor is not a visual effects artist sometimes. Like I know I have a lot of good friends that are extremely talented with visual effects, and they're also incredible editors. So but it's another responsibility, and you have to, as an assistant editor, you have to manage your time well. And that kind of falls into how much time you can specifically put in this shot, or all the other responsibilities that you have. So the main idea would just be to express the director's vision and the producer's vision on what the final VFX should look like, whatever detail that may be. And with that temp VFX, it's something extremely helpful for the VFX artists and the vendors to have, so they can visualize, oh, this is kind of like what they want, how they're trying to do it. And then at the end of the day, when we're showing our first cut, our first editor's cut or director's cut, and all the way down to the producer's cut. We want to be able to have the VFX kind of in the movie, even if it's the first draft that the assistant editor made, just so the producers and the people that are watching the film can visualize how things are going to look like.
Yeah, I think that's really important to mention that assistant editors are kind of like the main link to the director for a lot of these other vendors and the post house. Sometimes the director is very busy, and if it's not in the cut that they're watching with the editor, then how do you get feedback? So for the assistant editor to really have a good understanding of the vision and try to pre-visualize that for the director so that visual effects and finishing and everyone gets a good sense, even for sound, gets a good sense of timing and placement and size and scale and everything. It's super important. So speaking of super important, Alex, so you kind of are the other side. So you work directly with the assistant editor as well. So finishing artists, I find everyone's got a completely different skill set. You've got a lot of experience in a lot of different post-production aspects. So I feel like you can bring a lot to the table. So you might have a little bit more VFX experience and skill set than others. But if you want to talk about your role with visual effects and how you talk to all the other vendors and editorial, as well as your feelings on fluid morphs, everyone's favorite.
Yes, no, we'll get to fluid morphs after the good stuff. Yeah, so with in finishing, we often will like start with working with vendors to do pulls for visual effects because they'll want to have their plates pulled from like the highest quality source media. So that's like the earliest point usually where editorial's like, hey, here's all of our visual effects. Can you pull the plates for the visual effects vendor and then apply color management or resizing, cropping, however they want them prepared for finishing. And sometimes like they'll consult with us to see like if we have any recommendations. But yeah, like essentially I kind of see myself as like the mirrored version of like the assistant editor, where we're working on the finish with the high quality source media and like the online conform. And I need to mirror everything that Juan is doing in his edit with the editor. And so like when we'll get a project turned over, I'll usually ask like, hey, can we get a list of visual effects with the VFX names and like if anything's changed and like shot versions, like can I see the tracker? Like I really want to just like dive into all of the work that they've done, like preparing and organizing for the visual effects vendor so that the handoff can be seamless. And then often we'll get like a list of things that are kind of like it's like a wish list where editorial's like, well, maybe we could do this in conform with the finishing editor, finishing artist. And so I'll ask for that too and kind of evaluate like, okay, so this fluid morph looks great in the offline because, they use like proxies and sometimes there's like fine details and like face mashing at that cut point where it morphs aren't as noticeable, but then you look at the 4K or higher res media and it's looking crazy. So you have to do a lot of paint work and custom splines to like kind of get that morph to look natural if it can. And the same goes for like split screens and like basic like I've done a few phone comps, but I usually pass those off because they're quite tedious, especially with custom elements being applied. But yeah, it's kind of at that stage I'll evaluate like, okay, these are the things I can do, and then I'll give them kind of like a time frame for what it will take because obviously the film has to be conformed, like the edit has to be done for the finish. and then the visual effects are kind of on top of that. So it's kind of like a secondary task to the conform as like a kind of pseudo VFX artist. So yeah, a lot of time it's just kind of like bouncing ideas back and forth with editorial, talking about what's working, what's not working. Like we can do this in X amount of time because it's quite straightforward. If it's like a paint out or something simple, or we will suggest that they actually do bring it to a visual effects vendor who can, dedicate like an artist or multiple artists to get it done in less time.
Yeah, I think you're kind of like evaluating everything, and everything goes through you first, and you get to try. And then, so I think what some people don't know is you're working in real time almost, like as close to real time as possible, whereas visual effects, it's a very long process to get it out of your system, to then get it transferred over to another company, and then have them build a whole pipeline just for one thing, and then do the work, and then get versions internally, and then get it back to you very much later. So it becomes much more complicated when you have outside work. So I don't know if you want to hit on that.
Yeah. Yeah. So like oftentimes in sessions too, like with the colorist, they'll notice some sort of thing they need fixed, and they have to deliver the film at the end of the week, and there's no time to go back to the visual effects vendor. And so I'll like have to hop on in the background and kind of like do some sort of comp or something. And I usually do it in Fusion, which is like now built into Resolve, or has been for quite a while now, but it's a pretty robust compositing software. So I'll do my like comp that's kind of living in the final editorial or final online project, and then turn it back to the colorist, and they can watch it however, like an hour later, or however long it takes. But usually if it takes me less than an hour or a few hours, it's definitely something we will say yes to. It's when it gets to be like a massive project that we have to kind of kick it back to the people that have more resources, the visual effects team.
Okay, great. All right, I'm gonna go back to Molly. So if you can talk a little bit about kind of like the script breakdown process, and having someone from visual effects read the script. Like, what if you read the script and you're like, there's no VFX, I don't know why would I even go through that process? I'm just not going to talk to them yet. Can you talk about any scenarios maybe, or benefits to including visual effects during pre-production?
Sure. I mean, I always, obviously having a working with post and working in post, I try to keep an eye out for a lot of that stuff when I'm reading the script. A great AD will also keep an eye out for a lot of things, which is really helpful as well in breakdowns. But either way, having a visual effects presence, or somebody with that experience that can step into the conversation and be able to, ask questions that people aren't thinking about, because everybody on a set has their kind of role that they're playing to all collaborate towards the same goal, and they're all communicating and working, in tandem and stuff like that. So having a visual effects person who can come in and talk to the different departments, make sure that they know what they need, so that on the day when we're doing things, we can get it done efficiently, we can get it done correctly, and we don't have to worry about it being a problem on the back end. Ends up saving time, ends up saving money, and it ends up creating a better product at the end that people are happy with as well too. So I always try to consult visual effects whenever I can, and I recommend bringing them if you can bring them to set. Especially for certain things, it does make a difference in making sure that you're capturing what you're doing. And sometimes, visual effects are amazing. There's so much work you can do, but I'm sure Shayna and other people can attest. There's certain things you can't fix, or you can't save, or aren't going to be the way that you necessarily could have made them if you had taken the time and spent just a little bit of extra effort on the forefront, instead of just kind of saying, okay, well, we'll get this in the back end and we'll see kind of, what happens and stuff like that. So having that person there who can ask those type of questions while everything else is going on, and report back so that we can make informed decisions. There might be something that seems like it's not going to be that big of a deal, and after consulting with visual effects, it becomes more of a thing, and so then we can make the decision: is this something we want to invest this amount of time in or not? And make those creative backups in advance, so that we're not stuck at the end of things where we don't have options, where we can't do all the things we want to do, and we're limited in the edit and therefore limited ultimately in the creative.
Yeah, it's almost like when you're on set and you have a fix it in post potential shot. Do you reshoot since you're all set up for it, or do you move on with your day? So this is kind of like doing that thought process, even before you choose your locations, choose blue screen over green screen, like all these different things to think about. So I think the other thing I was hoping you could talk about is bringing a visual effects supervisor on set can be expensive. So why would I push some of my post-production budget into production to have someone on set who is just there to basically give advice?
Sure. Well, I think obviously having somebody there, that's their experience. They're the department head. I mean, when you think about it in terms of how a production operates, every other department has their production head that's responsible for what they're bringing to the day. So if you kind of think about it in that realm, it's kind of crazy that VFX aren't on set to begin with, because of the fact that everybody is there collaborating in real time, and figuring this all out together as we're doing things. So anytime that I can have a visual effects supervisor or advocate for that on behalf of what's going on, it's going to obviously save money on the back end of things. It's going to let you know what you're getting into up front, and be prepared for that and make sure that you have what you need to do what you want to do. And it's going to make your director also, be able to comfortable. And thirdly, like, it may seem like it would actually slow down your schedule, but if you plan this out and have these conversations in advance, you actually can get through your shoot faster, or your day faster, because the visual effects supervisor will make sure that you are set up properly, you have you're getting what you need, and you're not capturing stuff you don't need for something. So it's really all about, it's giving you all that pre-production time that we spend prepping a film. It's really just putting extra, adding that time at the beginning from post, so that you can really be prepared for those things to happen, and know where you're going to end up at the end.
Yeah, and I think it also gives you options later. So when I'm on set, I usually and the director wants something that wasn't in the original discussions in pre-pro, we kind of have a quick meeting and kind of say, all right, we'll do it that way, but as a safety, can we also shoot it this way just in case, since we haven't planned it enough? So just having everyone being open to new ideas on how to accomplish the vision in different ways, I think is really important as well. So be flexible. All right, so moving on to the assistant editor. The tasks that an assistant editor has to do these days with visual effects seems to keep increasing. And so what do you feel like are the skill sets that you look for in, or are required of, a good assistant editor these days? Who makes a good candidate? What should people, if they're looking to become like a solid assistant editor that will have to do visual effects work every day, plus everything else that is known about the assistant editor role, what do you feel like are the things that you would look for in someone?
Yeah. Well, first, to have a deep understanding of the editing softwares that you're using. That's probably the number one thing it has to be. So some editors like to use Media Composer, other editors like to use Premiere Pro. It all depends on you know, what they're comfortable with and what they choose to work with. And so we kind of have this discussion right in the beginning, and you know, how we're gonna adjust our workflow based on the specific on the specific editing softwares that we're going to be using, because that's going to affect the whole workflow and post-production. You know, an assistant editor that knows After Effects and Resolve, you know, as pretty well to do you know, minute tasks to, again, for After Effects to create those visual effects that, you know, you're not able to create either in Media Composer or Premiere, and they're a little more heavy-handed. It becomes a lot easier to do it in a software like After Effects like that, and then Resolve, you know, for color adjustments and transcodes for dailies and stuff. Like whenever things come up throughout the post-production, to be able to have that knowledge of those softwares is incredibly helpful, and it will make your life so much easier. It's so but then again, you know, I'm gonna be honest, like if I'm working on a film that is I'm working on it in Media Composer, and I'm doing it for 7 to 8 months, and then, you know, a couple months later I have to start again in Premiere Pro. It takes a little while to just kind of adjust your brain because the workflow is so different. But at the end of the day, it's kind of like riding a bike. It just becomes, it's hard at the beginning, but it just becomes a lot easier. And then you can focus your attention more on things that also become important for as a job for an assistant editor to have. So, I mean, regarding visual effects, you know, like I said, labeling VFX and turnovers and being able to manage your workflow in a way that it's going to be easier for you to go back to things whenever the VFX vendor needs something specific from you, or whenever the vendors are starting to like give you different versions of the shots. I've worked on productions that have sometimes 200 shots, other times they have 800 visual effects. And so if you're the only assistant editor, you have to really just be very organized in a way that, you know, you know exactly where everything is, because sometimes the director decides to go to a different version, and or this version, you know, and they go back and forth on it for those specific VFX. And so it's your job to get that quickly and be able to manage all that. And not only that, but you're also assisting the editor to get that stuff, and to be able to, you know, he needs to have confidence in you to be able to know that you know the project so well, like the back of your hand, that whenever he needs something right away, it's there, you know. So I probably, like I said, one of the most important things is attention to detail on things, especially when VFX are coming in, and as an assistant editor, one of your jobs is to review the shots. So you need to have a careful eye and to make sure that everything is following the director's and producer's vision. And apart from all the other all the other things that an assistant editor has to do.
Can you also, if you are working in Avid versus Premiere, what are some of the strengths versus weaknesses of each one when working with VFX timelines and turnovers and putting updated versions back in and things like that?
Yeah. Well, it's just they're both really good at what they do. And I mean, Premiere has come a very long way. And it's become a lot more intuitive when it comes to that type of workflow. Uh, uh, Media Composer, it's all about how you organize, right? How you organize your project. You start getting into the nitty-gritty on, where things live, how things need to be in specific places for it to be able to work properly. And same thing with Premiere. It's a little different, a different monster in a way. But it's such a crucial and important thing to know, because that can really make or break your post-production workflow at the end. And just things move so quickly and just so fast, and things just need to get done yesterday. So it's just a matter of really getting to know the software that you're working with. When it comes to strengths, honestly, I feel like uh it just comes down to preference, I think. A lot of people have started in different in just a different environment of how they edit. So some editors prefer Premiere Pro and other editors prefer Media Composer. um uh and myself, I prefer Media Composer, but that's just because I learned that first and kind of grew up with that and over 10 years ago. And for me, it's a little more intuitive and easier to manage. But Premiere Pro, in a way, it's the same thing. Now that uh, they've really are nailing down on how to work on a project with multiple editors and all that stuff, something that Avid had, right off the bat, and which was probably the main preference of the workflow in post-production, to use that, because it was so seamless, and everything that you had to share and all the files that you had to share. But Premiere Pro has caught up in its own way. So
Cool. And before we move on to Alex, there's a question in the chat. How do you prioritize your multiple roles that you have as an assistant editor? Do you prioritize visual effects? Do you prioritize your day-to-day AE tasks? Do you have to have someone else make that decision for you?
yeah, unfortunately, you don't have someone else making that decision for you, unless unless the editor, or the production is asking for something specific that they need right away. But at the end of the day, it just comes down to uh, you know, going with your gut and just being like, okay, so in the next 30 days, we're gonna be having dailies, and they're gonna be coming in, and your first job as an assistant editor is to get those dailies to the editor as soon as possible. So as fast as possible. The editor needs to be able to see those and to start working on those scenes, because he wants to have his time, share it with the director, share it with production as they're shooting, in case there's something that they need extra, or that's something that we're always looking out for in post-production, because like Molly said, we don't want to get into a situation where it's constricting the creative process at the end of the day. And so uh, uh, it's just different sequences in your job that you have as an assistant editor. So like I said, first 30 days you're dealing with dailies. The next 6 weeks you're dealing with the director's cut. So and during that time you're helping out the editor with whatever he needs, or she. So the sound effects that you need to add, temp visual effects, that's when you would kind of start working on those, and figuring out, if the story works, trying to break it down and start cutting based off the script. And then after that you move on to the producer's cut, then you move to the network cut. And so you have to see your job as kind of like a sectioned out specific things throughout the post-production workflow. And then after, you lock picture, you're turning over and you're doing all that work and communicating with the vendors on certain things to get to the finish line and finish this movie at the time that it needs to be done. The cool thing about assistant editing is that you practically get to see the whole process all the way through. And that's something that I love about my job is I get to see the whole thing and experience the whole thing. So, but it's yeah, at the end of the day, it's just, you just have to try to figure out how to organize your day. And that at the end of the day, that comes with experience in a way. And if you have friends, if you have people that you can kind of lean to, I've worked with incredible people that, I'll just be like, dude, how do I do this? Like, or like, what would be the best way to manage my time? I know a lot of people in this industry that are just so eager and so helpful to new to new people that are coming in and starting on their own, their first movie, or they got their first gig and they're trying to figure it out. So honestly, that's the only way that I've been able to do it. And if it wasn't for those people that have helped me throughout the years, I wouldn't I wouldn't be in the position that I'm in right now. So
Name drop everyone right now. No. So we're almost out of time. I just want to get to Alex to answer your part. So Alex, as a finishing artist at the Post House, do you have any tips for the Post House working with editorial and the VFX team? It's kind of like this triangle during the turnover process for VFX or during the reviews and final stages.
Yeah, I think this is a great time to talk about metadata. So at this point, when we're getting to the point where visual effects are coming in from the visual effects house, and also we're getting turnovers from editorial, who are kind of like telling us which versions to use, because oftentimes, we'll go through many versions until something's final, even in the DI. So we're kind of relying on editorial to point us in the direction of what's final or what needs to be reviewed or compared during the color grade or during a VFX review in like a DI room. And so those turnovers will have metadata, which has like VFX references for editorial, while we get the VFX shots that are like EXRs or like the more high quality codec material. So we have to kind of piece those together, make sure that they're cut in the timeline appropriately, and that we have to make sure the handles look good and that the color management looks good. So it's kind of, there's a lot of things to check and a lot of things to ask about, especially ahead of time. But sometimes, we'll get visual effects that we didn't pull, and we'll say, hey, like, what color space is this? It's not matching another camera. And so there's a kind of a discussion that has to be had there. But knowing your source material and just making sure your turnovers are rock solid. So I can open an EDL and read it, import it, and see exactly what shots need to go where. And then I can just check the reference and apply color on our end, and everything looks nice. And yeah, we have tools to check EDLs automatically, or to rename if we're pulling shots. So sometimes we'll have to talk to editorial to make sure that they're passing like the VFX shot name in like a locator column in an EDL, which is just like dropping a marker with the shot name on it so that we can say, hey, this source clip belongs to or is this shot or will be this shot. And then we kind of have that full view of where the shot originated and like what the whole pipeline has looked like.
Yeah, I think that's important to mention that sometimes the VFX shot names, version numbers get different, different coding everywhere, different like amount of numbers in it in the file name and things like that. So
you have different vendors. It's often like you have to kind of organize by vendor, like on the DI side, so we know like, oh, like they use 6 digits in their frame counts and they use 7 and like sort of things like that.
But if it doesn't match everywhere, by the time it gets back to you, it makes your job manual.
Yeah.
So, I mean, a lot of what you do is kind of eye matching, double checking everything. So it just adds another layer and more time. The more things don't match. So we were going to talk about AI a little bit, but we're running out of time. So I was hoping everyone could give kind of like final advice. So if you were talking to someone on the post team, what would be kind of like your advice when working with visual effects, no matter how big the project is? So Molly, do you want to start?
Sure. I think my biggest advice is always, this is a collaborative process, both creatively, but also technically, workflow, everything. So ask questions. If things don't make sense, if people aren't thinking about things, ask them if you're on. It does everybody a favor to make sure that the communication is going. And if you're not receiving information, or you don't think that production has thought of something, would rather, have duplicate information or already, let you know that we've already thought about it, or thanks for letting us know, than completely, just let something disappear that then becomes an issue down the line in post. So especially if it's going to add more work to other people's workflows, which again equals more time, more money, more all of these things, advocate, because I think the biggest thing I can advocate for is just more communication between production and post, while production is happening and during prep as much as possible. If people are already hired and on by that point in time, it just makes the process so much smoother and everybody's happier with the result in the end. And everybody's going towards the same goal. So there's no reason not to start the teamwork early on.
Yes, don't make assumptions. Ask. Okay, Alex?
Yeah, I think a big thing for me is like always push for the best organization possible, which is something that Juan talked a lot about. But yeah, like sometimes, you'll be working on an indie feature and it like something, and they'll say, hey, we've got all these visual effects, and we'll be like, oh, great. Do you have a tracker? Like, is there some sort of like cohesive list of like what's happened, like what they are, like what we can expect? So like get really good at Google Sheets and make some fancy trackers so that you can send it to me and I can be really happy. I remember on Miguel Wants to Fight, Juan made this insane tracker where there was like hundreds of shots that we had to sort through, and it was a beast, but really fun time. But yeah, that stuff is always helpful. So
yeah, I think Molly and I are working on a short film and it even has a shot tracker, and there's only a few shots on it, but it's still super helpful to keep track of everything. Juan, what is your big takeaway advice?
Yeah, so probably the most valuable thing you can bring as an AE is to be observant of the crew that you're working with. So editor, producers, directors, vendors, and try to help out whenever needed. And thinking ahead of problems. And because that any problem that you see or you might think that could happen it will impact the future of the workflow, the future of the workflow of the show. And so that's something that again, you want to try to be as you know, as ahead of things, and also to be aware of the skills of the crew around you. And whenever there needs to be a helping hand to be that helping hand for those people. Because at the end of the day, like we said, we're trying to finish it, and we're trying to do the best that we can, and it's something that we all are very passionate about and that we love doing. Yeah, I think that's all I got.
Yeah, pitch in, share the workload. We all want to get there.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't want to make it harder. We want this to be fun. We're in this because it's entertainment. So I think from the visual effects side, my takeaway is visual effects is kind of where the magic happens. We can do anything, but we might not be able to do it for your schedule and your budget and what you shot, things like that. So again, including us early in the conversation will get you as the filmmaker to a place where it is something that is achievable and is something that is the vision that you wanted, even if it's slightly different approach than what you originally came to mind and thought you were going to do. So involve us, especially with virtual production now. You have to involve us because we need to actually finish stuff before you even shoot. So it's kind of like the circle process. So it's always a loop. So yeah. And then thank you, Chris, for inviting us to come talk today.
Thank you, Shayna. Thank you, panelists. Thank you to everyone who showed up, and we will definitely readdress these topics later this year.